Welcome to the Church Matters podcast, where we talk about topics related to the church in a way that honors the church. Thank you for joining the discussion.
All right, I've got Dwight Stinnett on the line, Dr. Dwight Stinnett, and it's a pleasure to have you on board today having these conversations.
Thank you, Cory. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I imagine you'll be a frequent flyer on the show. I actually have a bunch of topics lined up for upcoming episodes, sharing them with names, and your name shows up quite often.
I'd be glad to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, you have a couple PhDs. Many of our people might not even know about that. You have a couple PhDs, and one of them in particular is kind of what I want to focus in on today. And it's kind of an area of expertise then of yours, having studied in that field. You're also a churchman. You know, you love the church. You've given a lot of your life to serving and ministering. And so we'll have some conversations about the church and leadership in upcoming episodes. But today, I really do want to talk to you about that initial PhD that you received and then what you did with it after that. But the first thing, before we even jump into the conversation, I was talking to one of the people from our church, and I was talking about you. And I was like, one of the things that I love about Dwight is his humility. And he said to me, I wonder how he got so humble. And I said, I don't know. So any tricks of the trade?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I guess it was just the way I was brought up. I never, made a big deal out of any of this stuff and, out of any of the things I've done. And certainly, like anybody, I appreciate being recognized and all that, but I've just, I don't know that I consciously set out to be that way. It just kind of happened. So I blame my parents, I think, my grandparents, right?
They did a great job, then. They did a great job. But yeah, I think a lot of people, especially people who've given so much time and energy and even money to the pursuit of, different academic studies and those sorts of things, there's usually that liability there, pridefulness, and
I've met some of them, yes.
Oh, I'm sure you have. Yeah. But again, it's just, that part of your temperament, and I would imagine it's a big part of your, spirituality as well, that it's a result of what God has been doing in you, but it's definitely noticeable by myself and others, and it's appreciated. So thanks for being so great about that. Well, you have a PhD in immunology. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right, but probably out of the gate, you ought to define what that is. And then I'd just love to hear, what led you to that and what'd you end up doing with that degree?
Well, technically the degree's in microbiology and immunology was a part of that field, 50 years ago when I was coming through. So that's just a technical part of that.
Okay.
I was interested in science from my earliest days. Mr. Wizard and Flash Gordon were staples for me, and you may not even know who either one of those are, but they were staple TV shows for me. Okay. Later that grew into a more specific fascination and infatuation with life and living things and all that, and the biology then really. I really got fascinated. I think I was in the third grade. My parents gave me a microscope and a telescope and a set of books, all about books that were kind of discovery and science books and things like that. And I really got fascinated with the microscope and all that. And it's just, it just continued from there. And I think summer third grade, I got my library card, and that was that really was what set me out of the gate. I think was being able to roam the library and get things and bring them home, and I took full advantage of that. uh, getting ready for college, that shaped up a little bit tighter, and went to university, and then thanks to some great gracious folks in undergraduate studies, they got me set up with a graduate school and a fellowship and everything, and went to the University of Georgia and did work there, and then to the Medical College of Virginia, and then ended up at the University of Cincinnati Medical School. So
Wow.
that's the short of it. So
Yeah, well, that's super fascinating. I'm sure everyone's kind of scratching their heads
yeah,
going, wow, this guy. So then what did you do with that degree?
sure. I mostly research, but also teaching. Those two are hard to separate in the university setting. And so I taught medical students, and I taught graduate students in microbiology, but I was the director for the surgical immunology laboratory there, and everybody's like, what in the world is that? Well, we did basically three things. That was the group that worked with transplantation, and you got to remember this was 40 years ago. It was a big deal then, and did some cancer research, but most of my work was around infectious diseases for persons who had been compromised either because of accidents, or injury, like an accident or a burn or something like that, or because of their cancer treatments were compromised. But that's mainly what I worked with. So
Okay.
I did. We did a lot of clinical studies on changes that happen that make you more susceptible to those diseases. Uh, we were around when the AIDS first broke out, which was a scary thing for people in the lab, let me tell you, because we had no idea what was happening, except that this was all over the place. And the city hospital there at the university was an indigent hospital, so these were the very people that we were dealing with all the time. So
Hmm.
that was kind of scary, but uh, that was the work I was doing.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and that's the reason why it just felt so appropriate to get you
Yeah,
on board as soon as
sure.
possible, talking about your experience and how it relates to our present
Yeah,
circumstances. So yeah, I guess my next question then has to do with your observations. Then I think that people who are trained have an ability to see what others don't.
yeah,
And, I was thinking about how Isaac, one of the guys from our church, he has a film company. So when he
yeah,
watches the podcast, he'll notice audio things and,
yeah,
video things that we could be doing better. And most of us wouldn't notice, but
sure.
that's just a part of what it means to be trained in that field. You see things
Right.
that others don't. And a lot of people right now are kind of the armchair experts. They're reading the articles and tracking with this thing and
Sure.
listening to the voices that they most appreciate. And everyone's kind of forming their opinion. But I
Yeah,
just wanted to make sure that we kind of created a space for you to share a little
sure.
bit about, you know, obviously you've been out of it for a while now, but you still have that background. And I think
Yeah,
that probably situates you a little better than most of us to interpret what's really going on. So
sure.
what are some of your observations given the pandemic right now?
Right.
What are you seeing?
Well, I think the first thing that was is I'm amazed and happy at how quickly we were able to identify some key things about this disease. When you contrast it with the AIDS thing that I mentioned a few minutes ago, it took us forever just to figure out what was going on, and then once we finally got the virus, it took longer to figure out what could you do with things. This really, in a matter of months, you knew exactly the virus that was causing it. They had the full genetic map of the virus and just all kinds of things. And the papers I'm seeing now and reading, they're doing things in weeks that would have taken us months to do 40 years ago, and that's just amazing to me to see that happening. But the questions that come out of this, and some of these have been answered as we've moved along with this, but early on was the question about contagion and how and the disease, and you know how does it spread from one person to another? I think we've got that pretty good now. That's the droplets in the air, and most people don't make the distinction between being airborne and being droplets, but it does make an important difference. The droplets are moisture particles, and the good news about that is that's easily stopped by a mask or putting a handkerchief over your face when you sneeze or cough. Truly airborne particles are going to hang in the air a long time, but those droplets are going to fall down, so they don't stay around long. And that's why that 6-foot rule is, it's not going to get out much farther than that unless you really are downwind of a stiff breeze on something. So the contagion was an important piece. I think the thing that's and that seems clear, but the thing that's troubling right now is how long are people contagious and being contagious without showing symptoms, what we call asymptomatic. Now that's scary. To know that somebody for a week can be carrying this virus and infecting others and not even know they're sick, that's really a scary thing. And I don't think we've quite settled that out yet. Now it seems like the more work they do, the more it turns out, boy, there are people that don't even know they've got this thing. There are definitely individual differences in terms of who is most susceptible to it. And you've seen those, and that's what's troubling and very concerning, is how contagious is it. The second thing would be about the immunity itself. We still don't know if people who have had this are immune afterwards. Now, we presume they are, but we don't know that for sure. And we don't know that it's permanent immunity, if there is immunity. There are some reports about relapses and about recurrences, which is scary, which means somebody can get it again. Is it possible that people can develop an asymptomatic carrier state, which means they're always carrying this virus? And, the famous example of that is Typhoid Mary. She didn't have the symptoms of the disease of typhoid, but gave it to everybody she was with, a food worker. Those kinds of things are scary. And so we don't know that for sure yet. And I don't say that to alarm people. That's one of the questions we've got to answer is whether or not people do go and move into a carrier state. Another thing is to not be too quick about placing blame on this. In this case with China, we do it with African Ebola. What's happening is that as there are more and more people and as more and more animal habitats are being destroyed and encroached on, there's more interactions between people and wild animals than is normally the case in the 20th century. And we come into contact with animals that we would rarely ever see. And so the possibility of viruses or diseases of all kinds jumping across there is scary. And there's some hot spots, like some of the isolated areas of China, like Africa, like the Amazon basin, but it's happening here too. And just to give you a silly example, how many coyotes do you have come through your backyard?
Quite a few.
So that's happening every place now. And because of climate change, animals are moving north and insects are moving north. My mom has armadillos in her life. We never had armadillos when I was growing up. But
Okay, wow.
but so that kind of thing is happening every place. And so as animals get displaced and come into closer contact with humans, we're going to see more of this, I'm afraid. And again, not to scare people, but to say, this is not because of those dumb people in China. It can happen any place because we come into contact with animals. So, and the larger question is, we really haven't had anything like this in this country since the polio epidemics of the 40s and the 50s. And so, I remember the first polio vaccine, but that's about it. My mom and her age, those folks remember those things. and so, my generation and the generation after really don't have any sense of what public health is all about, and what responses are to these things. And so you hear some crazy things going on with that. And it's, hopefully we'll get a better handle on what public health is all about, and how our responsibility plays into that. And, I can remember as a kid having these hygiene classes and health class. I'm not sure they do that anymore, but how to wash your hands, and cover up when you sneeze. I mean, it's simple stuff like that we're having to relearn now. Why
Right.
should the evening news have to talk about using a handkerchief? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, Ash, being a healthcare worker, being a nurse, we've been talking a lot about
yeah,
one of the outcomes of this is just an awareness,
yeah,
because even when you have a cold or any symptoms,
yeah,
a lot of times people are dismissive of that and continue to
yes,
work and continue to come into close contact with other people.
yeah,
And we're not great at washing hands, or,
no,
just thinking about those things that a nurse like my wife is thinking about
yeah,
constantly,
yeah,
And so I think, yeah, maybe an outcome from this will be just a greater awareness of
yeah,
the transmission
yeah.
of different things and how we can
That's
prevent
right.
that.
Yeah,
That's a good thing. This is kind of one of those moments where I feel like leadership is a big deal. I know we'll talk about it in upcoming episodes
sure.
together, but it's one of those moments where leaders are having to make really hard decisions
Yeah,
without all the information,
yeah,
and it feels like there are different perspectives based off of the experts that you're dealing with. So, people in the healthcare
sure.
industry would have a perspective and they would have recommendations
Yeah,
given their area of expertise. And then you've got economists who want to get things going again, and they're
yeah,
concerned about the repercussions of, the economy and how that will affect people. And social workers concerned
yep,
with isolation and the ramifications of mental health and things like
right.
that. And so leaders are having to make some very complex
Yeah.
decisions right now. And you really can't please everybody. So what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of, stay at home and social distancing and these sorts of things? I mean, how are you kind of
Uh,
processing that reality that we're living in right now, and how
yeah.
do you feel about it?
Well, it's one of those things where at least I detect mixed pictures on the things. Among our neighbors in our neighborhood, it looks like to me that people are doing a pretty fair job of trying to pay attention to that. When we go out to the grocery, boy, you can tell the difference on the traffic. I mean, it's just, it really is a major thing. And yet you can see some on TV, so, the beaches in Florida, say, oh my gosh,
Sure,
stuff like that, give people nightmares. But so, yeah, I think it's pretty mixed.
sure.
Uh, and I think there is an age thing with it too. It's pretty easy for us. If you're younger and got kids, and that's got to be harder. And if you're younger and got kids and got a job that's not essential, it really is hard now. How do you work that out? And I think our don't want to get too political about it, but our government's not done a good job about helping with that yet, I don't think. And we're so far behind the curve. Yeah, I know, all the financial advisors say everybody's supposed to have 6 months in the saving to live, and that's, you and I both know that's not true.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful if everyone did have
Yeah,
that.
exactly. It just doesn't happen. I mean, anywhere from 30 to 40% of Americans live from paycheck to paycheck.
Mm,
And so, yeah, missing one or two is a big deal.
right.
uh, and so, I think it's got to be hard for them, but yet you can't just decide to go back on your own. I mean, if the plant or wherever it is you're working is not running, it's not your choice anymore. So,
Mhm.
I think that's a tough situation. So each of us is different, and our circumstances are different, and our responses to it, no surprise, are different. And
Sure.
uh,
But do you think there's an effectiveness? I mean, you already mentioned the droplets, and the
yeah,
fact that 6 feet is a big deal because they're not going to really and hang in
uh,
the air and
right,
wearing a
right.
mask and those sorts of things. But you think this is the right call to help with the mitigation of the spread right now?
Yeah, I think it is. At this point in time, it is the easiest thing for us to do is to just try to avoid each other and keep space between us. I mean, you know, sometimes we act like that's a big deal, but it's really not that difficult. It takes a little bit of attention, but I do think it's the right thing. Some people don't understand, what the consequences or what the purpose of that is. It may not necessarily change the total number of infections or the total number of diseases. The point is to get that peak down so that we're not going above the capacity of hospitals.
Mhm.
And I think the report I saw yesterday said, like, in the state of Illinois, the ICUs statewide are at 70% capacity right now. Now you got to remember that's the whole state. That includes downstate.
Mhm.
So that means there are places where the ICU is pretty much at capacity right now.
Sure,
Uh,
probably
and
Chicago and some of the
right,
hot
exactly.
spots.
So the whole point of this is to slow down, to get that peak down so that it can be managed by the medical profession. Uh, and the other thing is, by stretching it out, it gives us gives them more time to figure out treatments for it. Even if it's a year before we get a chemical to treat it, even if it's a year before we get a vaccine to treat it, the doctors and nurses are going to be learning how to treat this in the emergency room and in the hospital more quickly. And so what's going to happen, deaths are going to go down. The death rate's going to go down because they're going to get more effective at treating. When it first came out, nobody knew what to do.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
People stopped breathing and you put them on a ventilator. Well, that's okay for a little while, but the longer you're on a ventilator, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, the longer you're on a ventilator, the worse it gets. And you start talking about keeping people on a ventilator 10 days, 14 days, uh, that's not a good sign. So learning how to manage the disease is going to get better too. So stretching it out cuts down on the hospital capacity needs, and also gives more time for them to learn how better to treat the disease, even in the absence of specific chemicals or vaccine to treat it with.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I appreciate, you lending some of your expertise to this conversation,
Yeah,
because I feel like a lot of us are just kind of fumbling through this and trying to interpret what we're hearing, and we're even questioning
sure.
journalism in moments like this and the reliability of sources and things like
Sure.
that. So it's kind of nice to have a resident expert
Well,
that we know and love and we know has our best interest in mind. So I appreciate you talking to us about these things. Well, let's move now to speaking to our listeners and just trying to help them process this. So what are some
yeah,
of the potential blessings coming out of this? I mean, it's easy to enumerate all the things that are challenging right now and
sure.
just devastating in some cases, but what do
Yeah,
you suppose some
yeah.
of the blessings might be going through something like this?
Well, I think if you look at the biblical narrative of things like that, crises like this are kind of like wake-up calls for God's people. And I'm not saying that God sent this to do that, but God uses everything. I think that's my belief anyhow, and I think if we allow God to work in us, this can be a wake-up call to us. There's more to my life than what I've been doing with this thing, and I've got people I care about that I haven't paid much attention to, or kind of take for granted or neglect sometimes, and I've acted like job is all there is, and maybe it's a call saying, you need to back up and take a breath and take a look around, and I'm not sure it's all bad to be stuck in home for a while.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can use it constructively to think about those things and to meditate. So I think that's one of the good things. Uh, you know, learning not to take folks for granted around us. That life is a precious gift, and it's not guaranteed to anybody,
Mm.
and it can be gone pretty quickly. Um,
Yeah.
and the tough lesson of, of learning that, we are entangled in a world. It's not just me and mine. I might like to talk about being an individual and taking care of myself and all that, but the truth is, it's not just my house, and it's not just across the street, and it's not just the next state over. It's halfway around the world,
Mm.
and we may not like it sometimes, but we're in the middle of it, and yeah, we need to, in the context, in that context, need to be reminded that God loves the world. The Greek word there in that John 3:16 is cosmos. Yeah, we learn it. God so loved Dwight. Yeah, that's true, but
Yeah.
I'm not all there is to it.
Yeah.
This whole expanse of the cosmos from one end to the other, God loves. I mean, we
Mm.
can't wrap our heads around that sometimes. We need to be reminded of that.
Yeah. I'm with you, and I think, yeah, the opportunities that we have in this moment for people to really evaluate and reprioritize, it's
Yeah,
just one of those wake up calls, and I hope many people are experiencing what you're describing of learning to care for our loved ones
yeah,
and learning to care for the world that
yeah,
God so loved. I
yeah,
think that's wonderful. How about negatives? As we were
yeah.
talking, and one of the things I'm really concerned with is just an unchristian spirit in the hearts
Yeah,
of believers, and it's
yeah,
a moment where there's criticism and people are getting
yeah.
judgmental and harsh and bitter, and
Very,
so
very harsh. Yeah,
I worry about that. But what
yeah.
are some of the potential downsides to all of this?
Well, I think that harshness and judgmentalism about others, it really is a scary thing. I've seen, and I expect you've seen some of the same things too. That the unabashed, this is God's judgment about things,
Mm.
and somebody, for whatever reason, you find a dozen different reasons that this is God's judgment on something, and I yeah, I kind of cringe at that, or well-intended folks that say, "Don't worry, God's got this." Yes, God's got this, but do you stop and think what that says to the person who just lost a loved one over this?
Yeah.
I mean, we need a more robust understanding of what it means when we say God's got it.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
and we just kind of breeze over that sometimes, and you know that I love that scene from Daniel in the fiery furnace, or before they go into the furnace, when the three boys say, God's able to, but you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I
Yeah,
mean, and
even if he doesn't, we're
that's
we're
right.
gonna
That,
stick
that
with
has to
him.
be one of the greatest confessions in all Scripture. Is I think God's able, but I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about it.
Oh, I
Uh,
really hope a lot of Christians come
uh,
to embrace that kind of robust
yeah, yeah.
theology, and
It
some of the trite
really,
sayings drop
yeah.
away.
Oh, yes. We just, we flip those things out, and we don't even understand sometimes, that cuts to the heart of some people and things.
Hmm.
So you're saying God doesn't love me, or God didn't love my kid? I mean, what is that all about? Yeah, that's bad stuff to be throwing around. So I worry about that. Yeah, I think related to that, and probably driving it is this lingering fear and mistrust of others and other people unlike us, and that was already growing in our society, and I,
Absolutely.
yeah, uh, I hope we can get past that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Me too. I hope we can learn to see beyond our differences and our different
yeah,
opinions on things,
yeah,
and come to be more gracious and
yeah.
compassionate toward others in general.
Right.
Well, I feel like we need to wrap this up. So let's
Okay.
let's turn our attention to some advice that you would give to our listeners. What are
Oh
some of the
gosh.
parting words? What would you suggest to people who are tuning in?
Yeah. Well, I think that this is reason for concern and caution, but not craziness.
Oh yeah.
I think it's a reason and an opportunity to demonstrate care for ourselves and for others.
Mm.
It's a time to demonstrate true confidence in God, and to share the compassion that we ought to have in Jesus Christ with others. It really is a challenge for us. I think folks need to be attentive to the possibility that God may be challenging the church to do something in a different way than we've done for a long time now. I don't pretend to see what that is, and my time's about done, and I don't have to worry about it. But it's becoming increasingly clear that things in the 70s shifted, and it was not like it was in the 50s and 60s, and the work of a pastor has changed so dramatically over that, and people's expectations have changed so much over that, and the models that we've got. We just got to reflect on some of that and what that's all about.
Yeah, I'm excited. You
Yeah.
and I have talked, and I guess what I'm really excited about is the potential of coming out of this with new, clear convictions of what the
Yeah.
church needs to be and do moving
Yeah.
into new season, and I
Yeah.
think that'll be a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's another conversation that you and I will get to
Sure, it
have,
is.
Lord
Really.
willing,
Yeah.
real soon.
There was a great meme going around on Facebook, and generally I don't like them, but I like this one. Right before Easter, that when it's clear that most churches were not going to gather the way we normally had. Probably the first Easter, I've not been in church in my life. I can't remember another. Maybe when I was in the service, but I can't remember for sure. Anyhow, the meme was, the church isn't closed, we're on mission, and that. And that's really what it's all about. I mean, I know this has been the drive for the last 15 years. And as you say at the end of the service, we're being sent. That really is what the church is all about. It's not about the gathering on Sunday morning for worship. Yeah, that's a great party, and we need to enjoy that. But being a Christian and being the church is out there in the world that God loves.
Yeah, and that's where people are right now.
Yeah.
In the world, trying to figure this thing out, and
yeah,
I'm glad you're able to help speak into that and help people process it. Dwight,
sure.
and this has been a pleasure to talk to you about these
Sure.
things, and even to hear more about aspects of your experience and your background that you and I haven't spent a ton of time talking about, but it's just fun to kind of hear that world that you were living in for that season before your call to ministry, and I'm excited to have more conversations with you. So
Sure.
I'm looking forward to the next time we do this, and the many times after that as a frequent flyer on the show. I appreciate you
Sure.
speaking into this, and I'm sure our people are helped by this conversation. So thanks for being a part of this, Dwight.
Glad
and
to.
Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, Dwight.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening in. Please like and subscribe to this podcast in order to receive notifications for upcoming episodes. If you've benefited from listening, we'd appreciate you taking a moment to rate and review the podcast. We'd also love it if you shared this with a friend. Until next time, may the manifold wisdom of God be made known through the church.